We continue our coverage of the Comey hearing with Hugh Hewitt, host of the popular conservative radio program, The Hugh Hewitt Show. McKay Coppins of The Atlantic and Karen Demerjian of The Washington Post will join us. I'm pleased to have them here. Hugh, let me begin with you. Give me your assessment of what you saw and heard today in Washington.
Well, it was kind of an epic day, Charlie. I think I was riveted, and I believe that most of the country excuse me, will remain riveted because it's a political theater of the sort we haven't seen since Oliver North or perhaps a couple of the other big ones. But it's a political event. As a legal event, it is of almost no consequence because it neither advances nor hinders an investigation. The president can't be prosecuted to begin with. The obstruction of justice statutes probably don't even apply to Federal Bureau of investigations. But as a political event, it's enormously significant, and there's a tug-of-war on right now over who won that event. And the president is claiming vindication, the Democrats are claiming obstruction, and Jim Comey's walking away dinged up, if not battered.
Why do you say dinged up but not battered, other than because of what he said, you know, about releasing, about leaking the memos that he wrote after these occasions that he met with the president?
That is the major part of the exhibits that are going to be introduced by history against James Comey today, is that he manipulated the president, leads people to think that he probably did so on other occasions and with different agendas in mind, that he only took notes about President Trump. But I think what was most disconcerting is the first meeting when the president is the president-elect. He goes in with the Steele dossier, which is a sinister document and discredited far and large, gives it to the president, and then concludes, as he testified, that the president can't be trusted, that he's going to lie about meetings, and leaves that meeting in which he proposed, you know, I'm going to discredit this, Mr. President, and begins what some people have already begun to say is an entrapment sort of course of action with the memo writing. So I left very disquieted by what the former FBI director's vision of himself was and how that's going to impact people's understanding of the agency. So it was a very disquieting day on many fronts.
Karen, what did you think?
Comey did address that to a certain extent in the questioning with Susan Collins. He said that as part of that meeting before Trump was actually inaugurated, that he felt the need to start assuring him that he was not under investigation. He said that multiple times today, that the president, while he was FBI director, was not under investigation because he was trying to avoid any sort of specter of entrapment. And I think he called it, he was trying to avoid a J. Edgar Hoover type situation where he didn't want the president to think that by putting this stuff out there, he was trying to hang it over his head in any way. So certainly he's entering, all of these interactions, it depends on which side of the fence you want to see it from. Supporters of Trump have said this, you know, exonerates the president because he just said that he hoped that Comey would act a certain way in the investigation. He didn't direct him, and that it indicated that Comey indicated, you know, fessed up to being the source of some of these reports that got to the New York Times. But others have said, well, you know, in one case they're kind of impressed at his candor and his honesty because he answered all their questions in ways that other people haven't, and actually said, hey, I was the source of this stuff, and that isn't a usual course of events. And also you have the people that are critical of the president right now saying, look, Comey has been really clear that he felt uncomfortable and that he felt like he was being put in a situation where he even thought that others, like the Attorney General, realized that something was off here and that he kept those notes because he felt like he was being, you know, potentially set up himself. So, you know, you could accuse it either way because this is not like there's a hard and fast record of the president saying, and I order you to do this. So there is that interpretation that has to come from Comey being in the room with the president at that point. And then, of course, Comey wouldn't go so far as to say, and I think this gets to obstruction of justice. So everybody who is drawing that conclusion there is also inferring from Comey getting pretty close to that line that that's where he's trying to go.
McKay, as the Mueller investigation continues, are we going to look at simply a battle for public opinion here?
I think so. I tend to agree with Hugh that ultimately this has been, and always will be a political story. You know, look, I'm not a legal expert. I've talked to legal experts. They generally agree that we haven't seen enough evidence to say that this is obstruction of justice. But at the end of the day, it's extremely unlikely that Mueller was going to conclude this investigation by straight up saying that the president is guilty of obstruction of justice and needs to be held accountable and drag him into a courtroom. This is always going to, I think, end up back in Congress, and that's why I think that it's most important to filter this today's proceedings through a political prism. I talked to one former Trump campaign advisor and asked this advisor, what did you think today? And the advisor said something interesting. It said that yesterday, when former FBI Director Comey's opening statement was made public online, that a lot of Trump's allies were celebrating, both in public but especially in private. They were celebrating this development because they felt like while the opening remarks certainly were damaging to the president's reputation, they ultimately didn't bring any new information to light that would lead to a serious sea change in this whole story. The advisor, though, did say that today's testimony was, while perhaps not legally harmful, was certainly politically harmful. And I think, and this advisor tends to agree, that this will continue to be a major political story and a major thing that everyone is wrestling over here in the political arena in Washington.
Hugh, did anything that you have heard from James Comey or anything else about the Russian probe and the effort that the president made, for example, in his conversations with the then FBI director, to go easy on Flynn, does any of that bother you?
I'm bothered by conduct on both sides. The president is clearly not skilled and does not understand. You cannot intervene in active investigations without political blowback, and was not prepared for a note-taking FBI director who was going to read into his every word sinister motive. But Director Comey also, I think, very troubling to me is that the idea that he would not exonerate the president when he had 3 times privately assured him, and Tom Cotton drove at this point as well. And everybody, Dianne Feinstein had gone on CNN and said there's no evidence, and everybody seemed to leak this. Another senator pointed this out, Marco Rubio. And Director Comey did nothing to put out the fire. So where are we as we conclude the Comey day? We are at no evidence of Donald Trump involved in collusion whatsoever. Donald Trump not under investigation by the FBI when Jim Comey is dismissed. And this exchange going out the door about Mike Flynn the day after Mike Flynn is fired. And I will go back. I said it already, but I want to underscore this for the non-lawyers out there. I've been teaching constitutional law for 20 years. You cannot prosecute a president. That's the weight of scholarly precedent. And the obstruction of justice statutes, 18 U.S.C., 1505, 1510, 1512, all do not contemplate, in the majority of opinion, do not contemplate FBI investigations as being a procedure that can be obstructed. All you can do is go to the Congress and ask for articles of impeachment. And so it is ultimately, that's what Nixon was, obstruction of justice and articles of impeachment. And if someone's going to argue that conversation out the door, dismissing the Attorney General in the room, that's unusual to get the chain of command out. But the president might have been worried about recusal. He might have been worried about the Russia thing being brought up with Jeff Sessions. There are explanations. Anyone wants to make an argument that that's an impeachable offense, I think most of the liberal law professors that I know are laughing at that.
I don't think anybody is yet making the argument, though, that that's an impeachable offense. At this point, the Congress is still very, very much, as some people are hinting at maybe there's obstruction of justice here, no one wants to say impeachment. And Congress is still in the fact-finding stage. And it's interesting to see the next steps that they're trying to take. Many of the different senators of both parties are saying we need to talk to Dan Coats, the Director of National Intelligence. We need him to answer the questions we asked him yesterday. Because remember, Coats was in front of the same intelligence panel, and so was Admiral Mike Rogers, the NSA director, and they wouldn't talk about their conversations with the president or with Comey. And many people in both parties are saying we need them to answer the same sorts of questions that Comey did, so we know if this was systematic or this was just poor judgment by the president to try to, get Comey to say he wanted him to drop that investigation of Flynn and that it stopped there, or was it more systematic? And they need to hear the answers from the others, because there is the testimony that Coats has given before the Armed Services Committee, and then there's the report that we published in the Washington Post that indicates that he was, also influenced to try to use his influence over Comey to get that investigation to stop. And Democrats are also pushing now to have Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, come for testimony, to have Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein come for testimony as well. So they're clearly all of that is building towards the question of whether or not there was obstruction of justice, but it's still the building stage, and it's very, very hard to find any senators right now that will